The universe we measure through heat and light by Rakshit Rao, where he'll be sharing his knowledge on the various methods we use to measure distances in the universe. All right, then, without further ado, here's Rakshit.
Okay, so hello everyone. I am Rakshit R. Rao and I'm the speaker for today's KSS. And I'm studying chemical engineering and in my third year. Okay, so today the topic of the talk will be the universe we measure through heat and light. Okay, so without further ado, we'll start. So now, in this today's talk, I'm not focusing on a particular astronomical object as such or a particular phenomenon. So my talk will say how to measure distances, and this is quite a challenging thing to do, right? Because we often see information presented to us, like Andromeda galaxy, for example, is 2.5 million light years away, right? Or Proxima Centauri, the second closest star to Earth, is 4.2 light years away. Now, a light year is 4 × 10⁻15 kilometers. So it's a very huge distance, right? So Andromeda is a really very far away. It's a cosmic distance level, what we're talking about. So how do we know that Andromeda is so many million light years away, right? We're obviously not been there. So how do we know this, right? So clearly, staying on Earth to measure such distances, there must be some tools or different methods used. So that's what today's talk will be about. Okay, and clearly, this is of great importance to astronomy and cosmology because since believing that used to believe that stars were embedded on a celestial sphere, and now we really measure distances so accurately. So this leap in our understanding is what I'm going to be discussing today. So when it comes to measuring distances in outer space, uh, there's not a fixed method. Okay, so it's not that we have one fixed method to measure all levels of distance. There's a hierarchy. So we start, and this is often showed as a cosmic distance ladder. Okay, so you can see a diagram, the cosmic distance ladder on the right. Okay, so we will start from the lower rungs of the ladder, which is a very basic method. Okay, and can be used only for a specific distance range, and then we move up and up until we reach methods which can be used to measure truly cosmic distances. So often we'll also see that these methods rely on one another, or in other words, they are not independent. Sometimes you might have to refer back to a previous method in order to really measure the distance. Okay, so this step based on distance is shown in the cosmic distance ladder. So my talk today will be moving through this cosmic distance ladder, starting from the bottom to the top. Okay, so then, so the most basic method, and the method I'm pretty sure we all are familiar with, at least in theory. So is radar. So radar is a brute force way. Okay, so this method is basic. So it relies on sending radar signals from Earth, from our satellites, and bouncing it off surfaces of planets, because this is a very local method, so it can't be applied to very far away things. Right? And then by measuring the time difference it takes for us to send and receive, right? So we calculate the time, because speed is distance by time, right? So we solve it for time. So this, is like a light. Okay, so it's like a light. We send a signal, and we have a satellite moving, so we can find out the time it takes for a satellite to receive and then send a signal back. Okay, so this approach is basic and can be used only within our solar system. Why? There are a few reasons. One, because we haven't sent satellites very far away outside our solar system, right? So the Voyager spacecrafts are on this, but still they're anyway near our solar neighborhood at least. And then the second thing is the strength of these waves. Okay, so strength of these waves really, weakens. It doesn't remain strong as distance passes by. So once it travels to a very far away object, okay, after getting reflected back, there is a chance that it's so weak, it's so faint that we really don't notice it through our telescope. Okay. So that's why radar is a very fundamental method and has been used to measure local distances. But when we measure further things, we need even better method. Okay. So then we come to parallax, which is the second rung in our ladder. So parallax, this is where the power of math comes in, if you ask me. Okay. So it's something very ancient. It's not that we knew it since recent days or anything. Something very ancient, something very simple. Okay. And it's based on no tools. We need no tools for this, just observation and a few trigonometric formulas. So I'm pretty sure that when it comes to parallax, we all have experienced it in some way. Right? So when you're traveling in a car, see objects rushing by us, see objects passing us in great speed. The words the position to us changes, right? Parallax is just making a geometrical figure out of this, finding the angle and then measuring the distance using trigonometry. Okay, so it's based on triangulation, as you can see. Okay, so if you observe a fixed object from two different vantage points, it appears to shift. So this is if you measure the shift, the so-called parallactic angle. Okay, so when it comes to measuring astronomical distances, we need a huge baseline, right? Because we have to construct a triangle and we have to observe a star. Okay. So we need to have such a baseline that when we move for such a distance, we can actually see a shift in the position of the star. Otherwise, parallax is meaningless, right? Parallax entirely depends on the parallactic angle. Otherwise, it's of no use. So here, the baseline is the diameter of the Earth's orbit, which is by far the largest baseline you can construct. Right. So it is two AUs. Where one AU is the distance between the Earth to Sun. Right? So an astronomical unit means distance to the Earth to Sun. Okay. So the method goes like this. So we start observing some particular nearby star in January. Okay. Then halfway through the year, or in other words, at July, when Earth is at a diametrically opposite point, again the position is noted of the star. And if the star is close by enough, we will definitely see a small shift. Okay, now this shift is small, but definitely, nonetheless, a measurable shift in the position of the star at the night sky. Okay, and we measure out this parallactic angle. So that angle is the key for this. Now, once we know the angle, we know the baseline 2AU. So then we use trigonometry, simple sign to find out the hypotenuse, which is the distance. This here. Okay. So we know this and we know this. So we use trigonometry to find out the. So we really see that this method can be used to find considerable distances up to 11 light years away. Okay, so I think we have to here take a moment to appreciate that simple trig formula. Something as simple as sine and cos, which we I guess have always underestimated back in school or whatever, can actually measure distances to the stars. But of course, parallax cannot be used for very large distances. Why? It's because the parallactic angle becomes too small to measure. So even this we've observed, when moving in the car, the moon doesn't change its position. Right? Moving in the car, the nearby obstacles change relative to us. The moon relatively stays fixed. It's because the moon is so far away. Right? So the same thing here. Though the diameter of the Earth's orbit is something very big, if the stars are too far away, the parallactic angle cannot be measured. So then this method fails. That's why it has a limit of up to 11 light years away. So that was it about parallax. Okay. So now we upgrade on to more stellar distances. So these are all in a solar neighborhood. So we move on to stellar distances. And this method is called standard candle. So this is a very important term. Okay. Standard candle is one whose actual brightness is okay. Actual brightness is low. We know standard candle. Here, standard candle. So now it goes like this. We all know that every object has a particular black body. So this applies to stars. So the light from a star, we disperse it through program, we obtain a spectrum, right, which will have emission lines, absorption lines, which are characteristic. Now, when we have many stars showing similar absorption lines, okay, or a similarity in their spectrums, we can assume that these stars are similar. Okay, either we don't know what is the mechanism behind it, okay, might not know what is the reason for these emission lines, but nonetheless, whatever it is, it runs common among all these stars. So when light is dispersed, we obtain a spectrum and we study the spectrum and then classify stars into different categories. Okay. And these categories are called spectral classes. And these are actually based on temperature. Now, so it's based on temperature and it runs like this. So it is O. Okay. So they are classified as O, B, A, F, K, G, and M. Okay. So O is the hottest and it's a blue type star. Then it all runs down. Sun is the G type star. So that's where our sun lies, neither too hot nor too cold. Okay. So somewhere in the middle, it's a G type star. Okay. So there are mnemonics to remember this, like only bad astronomers forget generally known mnemonics. So something very easy to remember. I hope you are a good one. So starting from O and ends up to N. Okay. So that's the spectral classes. But why is this needed? Needed because it really helps us to find out more about stars, and not just for measurement of distance, for other reasons as well, okay, like the mechanism of stellar fall structure, etc. So now, how is this used to measure distances? So it runs like this. We know a particular type of star. Okay, suppose it is a B type of star. Now imagine we knew its distance. I mean, we knew its actual brightness. All right, through some method which we will see soon. So if we knew its actual distance, I mean actual brightness, sorry, then based on how bright it is, the apparent brightness, we will soon see a relation which connects these two, the actual brightness and the apparent brightness. The apparent brightness is one which we see in the night sky, right? Something which has observers on Earth we always want. So if we knew the actual brightness, no, we could actually find out the distance. But how do we find out its actual brightness? So this is the issue here. But before that, we'll see what is the relationship between actual brightness and apparent brightness. So remember that actual brightness is called luminosity, the actual light output by the star, and the relationship is simple. So the actual brightness falls off as square of the distance, inverse square of the distance. So yeah, that's how it runs. So you have F, which is your apparent brightness, which we observe from Earth, with actual brightness by 4 pi r square. So r is the distance. So here we see that if we knew F and L, we could definitely find out the distance to these stars. All right. So now the entire we already know F because we know the apparent brightness. So now the entire process will depend on how do we find out its luminosity. All right. So I'll first of all explain the method. Okay. So this is now when we rely upon a lower rung of the ladder in order to really calibrate your distances. Okay, we use parallax now. So from parallax, we know the distance for local stars. So now once again, for these local stars, we can always find out its spectrum and classify its type, like what type of star it belongs, right? So for nearby star, we know its distance and we know its star type from its spectrum, right? And we know its apparent brightness. The apparent brightness is known, the distance is known. So for a particular type of star, then we can actually find out its luminosity or its actual brightness, right? So then we can form a catalog for this type of star. The actual brightness will be so many units. All right. So we classify O, B, A, all those spectral classes, all into their luminosities. So for every type of star, the actual brightness will be known, right? So we know the actual brightness of these stars. Then we have a catalog. Then we extend it to more distant stars. So for a distant star, now it's a very simple thing. We know its actual brightness now, right? So the problem is actually solved. We know the actual brightness by referring to this catalog we have done. We know its apparent brightness because that's always what we measure from Earth. Then it's a simple matter of, as I showed, F is L by 4 pi r square. So then we solve for the distance. We can find out the distance to these further stars. So this is the method and can be used for quite a few light years, like 100 or 1000 light years up to. Okay. So the method of standard candle. Right. So we now move on to our next. Standard candles always might not be very reliable. Okay, because many times you might have different issues like the star is occulted or something by galactic dust. So then we use Cepheid variable stars. Now these are special stars. Okay, so these stars, Cepheid variable stars, are not having the same brightness throughout the year. These stars vary in their brightness. So you can see a graph here on the left, bottom left, where you can see that its apparent brightness, the one we observe, is periodically varying, right? So it reaches a maximum and falls down, again goes up. Okay, so this is periodic. This period remains the same. So such a star is called a Cepheid variable star. It has a varying brightness, but it's not the variation of the brightness it was used to actually. It's this. It's the period. Okay, so the period is the key to measure distance using Cepheid stars. So now it turns out this period is directly proportional to its actual brightness. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that if we have a given Cepheid star, if it takes more time to oscillate between its maximum brightnesses, okay, between its maximum, then it means that actual brightness is actually more, or in other words, its luminosity is more. Okay, so you can see a graph here on the right where I have done a pulsation period, the time on the x-axis, and luminosity on y. Okay. So then we see a straight line here, meaning more is the duration for the cycling of between the maxima, more is the actual brightness. Okay. So then there will be a catalog which tells you that depending upon the period, how many days it takes, you can find out the star's actual brightness. And then we always know that given the actual brightness, the apparent brightness, so we find out the distance. Right? The apparent brightness here is the mean, right? The mean of what we observe between the minima and maxima. That falls somewhere here. That is their apparent brightness, what we observe. The actual brightness can be found, and then we find out the distance. So this method is useful for considerably huger distance, so to 100 million light years. So we really see that now we are getting to a cosmic level, not just the solar neighborhood. Okay. So Cepheid variable stars. So here in Cepheids, we used, or even in our method before that, stars were the standard candle. But now we expand this thought and we include in entire galaxies as a standard candle. Okay. So this relation, so-called Tully-Fisher relation, was found in 1977. The rather interesting one says that given a spiral galaxy, its actual brightness is proportional to 4th power of its maximum rotational velocity. All right. So let's see what this means. It means that that a spiral galaxy, for example, even the Milky Way, we've all seen in our the images of the Milky Way, see that it has different arms around it. So the rotational velocity of these arms, okay, and luminosity are connected. Luminosity is proportional to the 4th power. So a galaxy that rotates faster will be more bright. That's what this relation says. So now, how do we find out the velocity? Obviously, this method entirely relies on finding the velocity of these arms. Right? So how do we find out this rotational velocity? So this is done using Doppler effect. Right? So Doppler effect is something very fundamental and used very frequently in astronomy. We don't observe a Doppler effect in light in our day-to-day life because objects aren't moving fast enough. But when we consider the universe, there are objects moving at really considerable fractions of the speed of light. That's when Doppler effect of light comes in. So Doppler effect says that if an object is moving towards us, then that object will appear shifted towards the blue end of the spectrum. Why? Because as the object is emitting wavelets, because object is coming towards us, two wavelets are emitted in a very shorter distance. So that shorter wavelength means blue, right? So that's why an object coming towards us will have its wavelets slightly compressed because of its velocity. And this compression is visible to us as bluer light. And when it moves away, two wavelets are separated more. So it means red, right? So an object moving away over it, that's what uh, Doppler shift is. And that's how you can find out. That's the way we find out velocities in astronomy. Okay, there's no other way we could possibly try to find out velocity. Only Doppler effect. So the rotational velocity can now be obtained from Doppler shift to stars in the galaxy. Alright. So then an empirical relationship, which is the Tully-Fisher. Okay, so it will have a definite relation between the rotational velocity and luminosity. And once we know the luminosity, then it's again back to our usual formula, which says that uh, the luminosity falls off as inverse square of the distance. So it will help us to solve for the distance because the apparent brightness is always known. So this method has an accuracy of 85%. This is definitely very good considering that it works almost to a billion light years, right? 800 million light years. So this is now far beyond Andromeda or even our galactic neighbor. Right? So it's a very huge distance. And Tully-Fisher relation is something which makes the entire galaxy a standard. So this is how we really expand our sense of the universe once we go outside our galaxy. Okay. Now move on to next rung in our cosmic system, that is supernovae. So supernova is death of a high mass star, and there are different types of supernova based on how these stars go. Actually a type 1a, a type 2a, and so on. The one used to measure distance is a type 1a supernova. Okay, so a type 1a supernova actually turns out to be a standard. So what is a type 1a supernova? Type 1a supernova is when white dwarf orbiting another star accretes out too much material from the star, and then being unable to withstand the pressure, it undergoes fusion and then it explodes. Okay. So you might ask, how does this happen? Well, luckily it turns out that most of the stars in the sky, in the universe are actually binary stars. Now the sun is clearly an exception to this because apparently the sun doesn't have a partner, but majority of the stars are binary. So if one of the stars, which is not so massive that it can become a neutron star or a black hole, and becomes a white dwarf. And we know that white dwarfs have really strong gravity. White dwarfs are very small and compact, but they retain most of the mass of the original star. So it has a very strong gravity. So it can really suck out the material from its parent star. And once the pressure gets too much for it, it just explodes. So this explosion is seen to us as type 1a supernova. So now we know that how supernovas are. We try to find how it uses the standard candle. Type 1a supernovas are standard candles because of their specific light curves, which are unique to them. All right. So here, if you would pay attention to this graph, it shows how versus time and intensity for a type 1a supernova, how the intensity really fades out. So we see that there is an immediate spike in the intensity within the first few weeks, okay, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and then it steadily decreases over a time duration of several months. And this is the structure of the light curve of interest to us because that's just find out the distance. Now, what can you see common in these three light curves? These three are for different supernova, obviously, right? We see that more is the intensity of the supernova, the longer it takes for it to decrease in brightness, right? So that's very obvious from this graph. So it's the rate of decrease of the brightness of the supernova, which will actually help us find out the peak luminosity of the supernova. All right. So there will be again a catalog which says, depending upon the rate of decrease, what will be the actual brightness of the supernova. And now there is another advantage of using supernovas as standard candles, simply because they are very bright. Right? We all know that supernovas can literally outshine an entire galaxy. So you can see it. and that's why it can measure huge distances. All right. So once we know the rate of decrease, okay, we can find out the luminosity, and then once the luminosity is known, it's again f is L by 4 pi r square. We find out the distance because the apparent brightness we always know. So this is applicable for several billion light years. So now we are even beyond. I don't know. We are really a very large distance in space, and just take a moment to appreciate that all these huge distances are measured just by sitting in the observatory. Okay. We have not sent anything out there so far, and just nature gives us so many hints that we can do such amazing things. All right. So next up, we reach the highest rung of our ladder, which is the Hubble law. All right. Now this is really something worth explaining about because the Hubble law is really one of the greatest discoveries in cosmology, I would say, up to now, because it really changed the way we look at our universe and time. Okay, so the Hubble law was done by Edison. So he measured spectra of several galaxies, right? And amazingly, he found that a vast majority of them were showing a redshift. So they showed a redshift, meaning it was moving away from. Right? So from this, Edwin Hubble concluded that the universe is expanding. So when it made up the expansion of the universe, that's how it comes about. Edwin Hubble measured redshift in galaxy. So he concluded that the galaxies are moving the, and that means the universe is expanding. So that's what Hubble law says. Okay. So from the Doppler effect, you know that redshift means object is moving further away. Now, how is the Hubble law used to find distance? Now we are at the last paragraph here. Further away the galaxy was, more was their redshift. Okay, now this comes from law we see is so here that more further galaxies showing a bigger redshift, and a bigger means going faster, right? So that's the direct relationship between velocity and redshift. All right. So this is shown in this graph here, first of all, which shows distance here, and 1 parsec is 3.2 light years. So these are all really huge distances. So distance here and velocity here of galaxy. And we see that Hubble's relation says that just a straight line here. Well, more or less straight line because galaxies also velocity other than that. But nonetheless, clearly there's a straight line. It shows how distance increases, no? The velocity increases, right? And let me remind you, velocity means the redshift is more, right? So then the recession velocity, as it's called, was plotted, and then straight line is able to find out the slope. And the slope is the very well known Hubble constant, which is very important. So then we have a clear cut relationship between velocity and distance. So then we write this as an equation. This is V equal to H naught D. Right. So that was a straight line, right? So it will form a straight line which is V equal to H naught D. H naught is the slope. So the Hubble's constant has been evaluated. All right. Hubble's constant is found from the slope of the previous graph. So Hubble constant is 71 plus or minus 4 kilometer per second per megaparsec. That's velocity per distance, right? So then the method is obvious to us. We know the redshift. We can always find out the redshift of a particular galaxy. Right? So we know the redshift. The Doppler effect lets us calculate the velocity. Right? We always know h naught here. Right? So then we have v, we have h naught, and we can always solve for distance. That's how distance is found using Hubble's law. This can be used to find for any galaxy because every galaxy is moving apart, and further away the galaxies are, more so it's obvious to us that they are further away. All right. So this can really help us calculate any distance, at least in the current universe or the observable universe. So Hubble's law is, the pinnacle of our distance measuring ability because it really covers the largest scale we can imagine, which is in terms of the universe itself. So that is the Hubble's law, how it's used to measure distance. So what lies next in our distance ladder? You have come to the highest rung of the distance ladder, right? So I might ask, what lies, what is further for us? What is even further than what we can observe, right? So, but it turns out that there are restrictions to how far we can actually see things. Right? It's not that if the universe were infinite, if we could see infinitely far. That's not so. It's because the universe definitely had a beginning. Right? So we all know that, hints like cosmic microwave background and all that implies that the universe had a beginning, has a big bang. So the fact that the universe existed for so much time, all right, puts up restriction for how far light can travel, right? For a very simple reasoning, if the universe had existed forever, then there would be no issue. But if the universe has existed for 13 billion light years, then light traveling at that speed can only go at a particular distance, right? It reaches so far. So this is fundamental restriction on at least size of the universe that we can observe. And there's a horizon, and this is called the particle horizon. What is this? This the particle horizon is the distance beyond which, even though there might be galaxies, humans, or whatever, we cannot observe it simply because there hasn't been enough time since the beginning of the universe for light from those parts to reach us. Okay, and it turns out that this distance is up to 46 billion light years. Right now, how is this distance found? It's found because the universe has been constantly expanding, and even the rate of expansion has been changing with time. Okay, it's called as the scale factor. The scale factor is a function of time, so it's changing with time. So that may also means that distance to the particle horizon really grows up a lot. Okay, so it's up to 46 billion light years away. So whatever is beyond the particle horizon, at least for now, it's not observable. All right. So now general relativity and other theories might predict multiple universes or anything beyond that. Modern theories do predict it, multiple realities and all. But whatever it is, it's up to. And another thing, the particle horizon is definitely expanding. It's growing bigger. The observational universe is getting bigger just because the universe is existing more, simply for that reason. So over time, you might discover many new stuff out there. But at least for now, this plays a very fundamental restriction on what we can observe. So that's how we astronomers can now see. All right. So anything else will definitely have to wait. So I think we should really take up a moment to appreciate how just by sitting in our observatory on Earth, we have done so much. We were people who thought that stars are embedded on the sky in the celestial sphere, and the sun orbited the Earth. But now we have really expanded it to galaxies, intergalactic clusters, right? Clusters of galaxies, the Hubble law, the beginning of the universe. Right? So much improvement. So nature always gives us one or the other hints, though it might not be obvious to her. Right? It all depends upon very close examination. So this is how we have really grown in our understanding of the universe from stars on the celestial sphere to the Hubble law. So yes, that will be my talk today. Apparent brightness, yeah, it is the one we observe here. When we see a star in the night sky in any unit, so that's the brightness we measure. It's based. So I'm sure you might have seen a certain catalog. A negative value. There's a logarithmic unit which shows brightness in terms of different numbers. So the sun is a minus 20, all right, something around that order. And based on how much light we observe from them, from the galaxies, we told, right? So from the galaxies, how much light we get from them now on Earth. So that will let us find out its apparent right? In, so it requires a measure of how much light we get from that. So this is actually light flux. Flux really also as inverse of the distance, right? Inverse square of the distance. So that's why we'll have to measure the amount of light we receive.